Dr. Kelly Monahan. It's so great to have you on with us.
Thank you so much, Hope, for having me.
Right before we started to record, we were talking about how you and I both want to help people feel grounded in this moment. When you look at the anxiety in the qualitative data, one of the things that I think you could point to is people feel like the current work model is broken. In what way specifically do you think work is broken?
Yeah. And Hope, I love that you're starting with this. And to our audience who's listening, like, we see you, I see it in the data, and I see you. I know there's a lot of anxiety and fear that's out here right now. And I think, Hope, what you just said is exactly the root reason is we are working in an outdated system and trying to force fit this, old way of working into a brand new way of which organizations need to create value. And E&Y did some recent research that showed that the average lifespan of an organization back in the 1940s was 67 years. You could plan to work for a company, the same one, for a long time. Today, that number is 15 years. And so what's happening is there's this hamster wheel that both people and organizations feel like they have to be on in order to keep up and create value. And so the question that we can talk about today is, what is broken within work? And ultimately, how can we help individuals really cope and navigate, and ultimate leaders think through, how do I actually fix this problem that's out there?
Is the problem that the businesses are not successful because they are not providing enough of value that they can stick around? Or is there something else going on that is shortening the lifespan of organizations?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's twofold. Number one, the way that we create value is absolutely changing. And so today, a lot of value and economic value is being created through intangibles and content creation, digital means. And so that's a completely different way to think about work. We're still pulling from the way we plan, organize, and direct resources as if we're all creating widgets on an assembly line. That's the majority of our management theories still derive from that time. And so we're trying to create widgets in an environment when really the value that's being created is in a digital atmosphere. Total misalignment there. Yeah.
Okay. I not to age both of us. Widgets is not in the slang of Gen Z or Gen Alpha. I don't think anyone's ever in that group talked about widgets. Like, you and I know where you need a filler word for a thing. We talk about widgets. But yeah, to your point, people really are gravitating toward content and digital products in some ways because it's a lot easier. But what does that really mean then for the economy? I mean, if the economy is running on sort of digital vapor, I don't know how we can sustain that. We do need people to build. We need people to construct. So I know we're going to talk about work again and what's broken, but I do want to just really quickly get your thoughts on what you think the state of the world might be if people are gravitating toward more intangible products and goods and services.
All right. If we can get philosophical for a quick minute.
Let's do it.
Because this is a value conversation. Okay.
Yes.
I love that you hit on this. This is something that I think about, and I've been studying future of work now for 12 years. It's exactly what you just hit on, that as a society, we have overvalued the value that's created in a digital environment and undervalued the actual tangible resources and what we actually still need to have a healthy, functioning society. And so I have a 12-year-old nephew, and he wants to go be a gamer. He wants to go create, be a YouTube influencer. And I'm like, but Lincoln, there's also so much value in being an electrician and being a plumber and being a construction worker. And I think for some reason we have really misguided, the previous generation of really valuing that this work has dignity. This work provides value, and this is actually fueling our economic economy. I think we've lost sight of that narrative somewhere. And I think it's probably because of a slightly over rotation towards college education and STEM. And all the data that I'm seeing is, if you ask me, hey, should I go to college, to go create a sustainable career? I don't know. I might guide you to say, you know what, maybe you want to go be an apprentice and go into the trades. That might have longer term value and sustainability, because I'll tell you what, AI is not coming for the plumbers, the construction workers, our hospital, and teachers, all those service orientation that we need more and more of. That is what we need to encourage our young people to fall back in love with. And yes, you can go create your videos and go be a digital commerce and create content. That is definitely still needed. But as a society, we have to really figure out, how do we balance and optimize both of these views of how we think about work?
How successful were you in convincing your nephew?
Oh, not successful at all. Now, listen, he is brilliant, and he's already coding. And I'm like, listen, you got the skill set, go, keep running. But my ask to him is, please, if you have, as you grow up and you have colleagues, if they go into construction and they go into different career pathways, honor and value their work as much as the coding work that you're doing. There is no difference in terms of intellect or in terms of specialization. Human workers are needed across all sectors. And as consumers, we need to honor and value wherever the career paths take us.
There are some prevailing forces that are pretty hard to move at this point and to push back against, one of which is the compounding effects of how the algorithms reinforce certain storylines that make these types of jobs very attractive. But also, and I'm not going to play a blame game here and point fingers, but I do know how fingers are being pointed up the other way from younger students and younger professionals telling whoever it is they're complaining to at the moment, you guys designed the system that told us that if we did these things, that we would be guaranteed. Yep. Here I am with student debt. And like, those are super valid. I mean, I think you and I are also the byproduct of a lot of that. I mean, I wasn't encouraged to go into these fields. So we've kind of created our own problem. So if we're part of the problem, how do we actually become part of the solution?
Love that. And listen, elder millennial here. In my 40s. Same. And so byproduct of the system, you know, I went to college. I mean, I went to the highest levels of college to go get a knowledge worker job. I'm from Rochester, New York. It's a pretty blue collar industry. And everyone was like, go leave and go get a white collar job. And listen, I'm glad I did. But if I could do it all over again, I think the one thing that I am so excited about that I do think is going to help our system change is moving towards more entrepreneurship. Like if I had the choice, you know, and I'm sure if my boss is listening, you know, obviously I still love my full-time job, but you know, we're at Upwork. I would have loved to have gone and pursued more entrepreneurship, to have thought about what could I be doing to create value? How can I recreate a system, right? Even if it's much smaller than the Fortune 100s, that actually lives and breathes the way that the world is changing. So when I was coming out of college, no one was talking about entrepreneurship, really. No one was talking about freelance. I think that was seen as too risky or something that was on the peripheral. And what I think is really changing today, which I think is going to be really good for businesses because it allows them to be much more agile, and allows them to scale up and scale down, and also gives individuals much more freedom, is not force everyone into these massive systems that we have found out are no longer sustainable through up and down economic churns, and starting to think through entrepreneurship. And I think, how do we encourage more people to do that, regardless of what the profession may look like?
The philosophical sort of reason that we were chasing the jobs outside of Rochester and our suburbs and coming to the city is because, again, we were told, like, this is what you should be aiming for. And there's a certain validation that many of us still receive having a company that we work for be that marker of success or a signal to the outside world that I was vetted by these people, right? I mean, there's a lot of people go into iBanking, and, you know, when you're an investment banker, it's like a passport to any job in the future. Like, so is there a way, or do you already see a shift in the perception of small business ownership, of entrepreneurship, where maybe in the past it was looked down upon in some ways, in some circles, unless you really proved yourself? And if that isn't the case that you're seeing right now, what has to be done to shift that perspective?
Such a great point, because like as we think about like our identity, so much of that comes through work. Let's just go back 20 years ago, because 20 years ago is, you know, when I'm coming out of college, there was no really remote work. At the time, we were still telecommuting, and it was just it's like really obscure option to do work. And almost again like a negative perception of like, oh, that's a telecommuter. They you know didn't pass the bar to come into an office, or they're lazy. You know, it's kind of the perception 20 years ago. That reality has changed dramatically. Gen Z is identifying more of values. Like, I don't care what company I work for. I wanted to have the right value. I want to be solving the right business problems. And so I think they're having much more freedom and fluidity and that identity, which I think is healthy, quite frankly.
The values question and why and where it ranks in the priority list for different generations is a fascinating one always for me, because I'm always hesitant to group a lot of people together as a monolith. I don't know if you agree with that, or do you think that there actually was a lot more uniformity around the boomer generation, around Gen X, around millennials, and now we're actually seeing a lot more fragmentation in Gen Z?
Yeah. So I hear you on the generational side. Like, I'm also like very skeptical of generational research, because the question is, who doesn't have these values at 18 years old? Like, you don't have a family. You're still, oftentimes most 18-year-olds are living off their parents' paycheck. You can be optimistic, right? And you can go change the world. You see that at every generation at 18 to 24. Here's what's unique. We think about the Gen Zers today. You know, I think from an audience perspective, think about those that are just entering college all the way up through, you know, late 20s. For reference, they just overtook baby boomers in terms of percentage within the workforce. What's unique, different, and how I'm looking at this is, again, as we talked about, When I was 18 years old, the digital world was immature. There was very little to actually go do in a digital space. And so what I think what Gen Z is reacting to is they have a huge digital platform that they can go explore, and they have their identity much more tied to that than they do the physical world. They have so much more access than we did before. But on the flip side, no other generation has had as much economic pressure. The cost of college, the cost of a house over the last 30 years, it's risen. So this is the world Gen Z is walking into. And I think they're looking around saying, how do I still go pursue that American dream? Your traditional full-time work pathway of going and getting a college education, staying with the same company, maybe even rotating 2 or 3 companies is not going to work for me. This is not moving at a fast enough rate. I need to move faster to keep pace. And so what I think you see here is an acceleration of Gen Z changing things and reframing where work fits in their identity, where they want to pursue it, and where they find the most stability.
How are companies programming to actually accommodate and adjust and adapt to what they need in this new generation coming into the workforce?
One thing to clarify is all humans share a value and need for stability. You can't really innovate in a chaotic environment. There's short periods of chaos that work, and I think sometimes organizations over-rotate on that and think, well, that's where some of the best creative, innovative ideas come in, where people are burning the midnight oil. That only works for a very short period of time. The reality is, in order for people to perform their best, they do need stability. How we provide that stability is, I think, what Gen Z is asking us to reconsider. Because organizations are not moving fast enough, this is why I think entrepreneurship is on the rise for Gen Z, and why they're willing to have multiple clients and multiple engagements. I don't think people necessarily want to switch from company to company to company. It's exhausting, and it leads to burnout, and you have to reinvent yourself every time. Gen Z is finding stability outside the system in a way. And I think in the organizational side, I think we're beginning to see this shift slowly take place. The reality is we still structure work around jobs, and we assume that, as a job, that's not changing. I'm a researcher. My job has changed dramatically in the last 12 months alone. What I focus on, the way I create value, changed completely. 30% of it is probably now being done through AI. And I've really have figured out how to optimize and structure that. And then the rest is, what do I do? How do I create more value? And there's plenty of ways to do that. And so I do think organizations, we've got to get away from just a stable job notion as a unit of analysis for the flow of work, and really think through more agile talent planning, really waterfall, because we need to move at the same speed with our talent today.
Is the burden shifting? The burden for stability shifting from the responsibility of an organization, of organizations, to the individual?
Yes. And I think this pendulum has swung throughout history. The book, The Organizational Man, observed that people were giving up their individual responsibility in favor of being taken care of by an organization. And this person basically raised a warning signal and was like, that's a dangerous game we're playing, because an organization will never have the same interest as you as an individual, and that relationship will have an expiration date. That's what we're seeing play out. So now I think the pendulum's swinging back to more individual responsibility, where people say, I do want to have more control of my life, of my destiny. I'm willing to trade benefits or other things and go find them elsewhere in order to have that. And I think that's where we're seeing the pendulum swing. And again, I'm sure we'll continue to see that throughout human history. That's kind of where life works, through ebbs and flows. But I do think we're on the flip side towards more individual responsibility. And I think Gen Z is up for it.
When will the pendulum swing back next? Or do you think it actually will stay in this realm for a longer period of time than in the past?
I think it's going to stay longer than in past because of AI, because AI has democratized access to resources, intelligence, and the ability to be an entrepreneur in a way that we haven't seen before. And so that's why I think this is going to persist. In terms of the pendulum swing, we tend to see this as corporations and the economy goes down and they begin to lessen up what you just said: apprenticeship programs, internships, learning and development. Again, I'm a researcher, but take this with a grain of salt. I've had 2 people in my network quit their corporate jobs in the last month because they were not getting enough AI training and feel like they were falling behind. And so people are beginning to, I think, move with their feet and really beginning to figure out, do I have to go do this on my own? Or do I go to a company that's helping provide this? That is just kind of a wake-up call for organizations. There's consequences as we begin to lessen employee retention, employee recruitment, and really think through, what do I need in order for people to feel like they're keeping pace? Josh Bersin's research for decades have found that learning is such a critical retention driver for employees. And if they feel like they're falling behind, that's going to be a big problem. And so I think that's where we've seen some of the pendulum swings. The pandemic, let's be honest, organizations became very generous with how they were treating the workforce and kind. And we saw a very different organizational leader show up. Now we've come out of that and it's all about driving efficiency, productivity, cutting cost. And so again, there's consequences to that and people will vote with their feet and go find the right pathways. And if that means taking more individual responsibility, I think that's where we are today.
If people are leaving companies because they feel like they're not moving fast enough and they're not getting what they need, then are companies losing the best talent because of just the weight of their own operations, essentially?
I'll answer this with data because this is what we see in the data. And this is where I think freelancers are having an edge. They are upskilling at twice the rate of full-time employees, and their competency and skills towards AI is at almost double the rates right now. And I ask, like, why? Like, what's getting in the way? And it's exactly what you just mentioned. Employees right now are much more likely to be burned out. They're much more likely to not have the resourcing towards learning AI skills. And as a result, they're just trying to keep up, with the day-to-day pace. But the reality is they're missing of the broader macroeconomic trend. Like this is a big wake-up call. If you're not using AI, you're not thinking about AI, you are behind today. And I just don't know what else to say. And if your organization is not supporting that, that is a big problem for you as an individual because the consequences aren't in 7-10 years from now. We're talking the next 2 to 3 years. And you continue to see this structural labor market shift towards highly specialized, highly skilled talent. We've seen this anytime a technology disrupts. Skills bias, technology change. Technology favors those that have the skills to work alongside of that. And right now, the freelancer entrepreneurship space is outpacing full-time employees. And I think that needs to be a big wake-up call, to be fully honest.
I do want to go back and address the point that you made about how freelancers in general are upskilling themselves. I mean, in some ways you could say it's out of necessity because they have to be more competitive. They don't have the
100%.
luxury, right? So square that with the disadvantages that someone has in their company when it's out of their control if they're actually being upskilled or not.
I think we can go back to the theme that we were talking about, which is individual responsibility. To your point, what you just said, freelancers are squarely responsible for the growth of their company and their business. And I think they feel that weight more so than someone who's in a full-time employee position. They don't feel that same level of individual responsibility. But I would almost argue that's false. That at this point in time, you can't wait for a company to catch up. Like it's going to take too long for most of these companies, especially if they're large and there's a lot of bureaucracy. There's also a lot of, rightfully so, compliance and security concerns that organizations have. Like you start having thousands of employees start uploading documents into a chat GPT, there's absolutely security concerns and compliance. So I do think organizations, like as much as I'm being hard on them, I think there's a reason and a rationale why they're moving so slow. They have to get ahead of this. But you as an individual, that does not necessarily mean that you cannot be upskilling, whether that's LinkedIn Learning, Coursera, Udemy. There's so many different courses, and AI is one of those things that you learn by doing. You can do this on your personal, time. Use it as you're cooking. Use it as you're interacting with your friends. Like it just doesn't have to be this full work focus right now. Become a consumer of it first. And I think that's everyone's responsibility right now. And we all know the best consumers of technology end up becoming the best workers who adopt that technology in the workspace. So that to me is where I put the responsibility back on the individual.
If I were to interview some of the freelancers and some of the people that responded to this survey that you have conducted, I wonder how many of them would say, I was pushed into this position because we know the companies that have had massive layoffs were the ones that we thought historically would be the most stable, the big tech companies. One thing that I hear a lot right now on the tongues and lips of leaders is being asset light. If they're already thinking asset light, I mean, the most clued in workers are saying, well, I'm just going to go and leave first. Or if they're forced in that position, they say, well, this is sort of my only choice now. So I guess the question more for you is, were we not pushed in this direction by the companies who are essentially looking for the fattest profit margins and growth quarter over quarter?
It's a good question, right? Is it the chicken or the egg? What has caused this? To me, as a researcher, I think it's always a combination of both and the intersection. It's the interplay of both that's happening at the same time. Now, for our particular research, if we go interview our freelancers, the majority of them have been freelancing for longer than 3 years. So these are going to be more of your established freelancers who have chosen this a little bit before the tech layoffs began to occur.
So however, this was during the Great Resignation. They were bred and they were born during that period.
Yes, exactly. Okay. Where I think for them, this was more of a choice. Now, that doesn't mean that we've had other people come in since who have been laid off, and this has been somewhat of an involuntary career pathway. But I think what was interesting, and there was almost a third of full-time employees, though, because we also asked full-time employees, what's your preferred career pathway, that are beginning to look at freelancing. Is it because their organization isn't providing the right resources, not the right leadership? values misalignment. I think all of that's probably underneath the surface of why people are looking their head up and for the first time and beginning to explore this. And at the same time, organizations are beginning to embrace freelancing much more from the outside to actually bringing them into the core.
Is freelancer still a dirty word?
It's a great question. I ask that almost every time in my survey. I don't use that exact language, but
What do you use? What's the question? How do you phrase it?
As freelancers, what's the first word that comes to mind?
Okay.
When you think of freelancer, what's the first word that comes to mind? Fascinating data on this. I ask executives this question. It's a little depressing. 2 years ago, what we saw is only 25% of those C-suite leaders use human words. Creative, innovative, thoughtful, kind. I mean, there was just like all these different words that came up that was kind of surprising to me as a researcher. Very much less around the task or the transaction. The other majority, 75% of the leaders said cheap, efficient, contractor, gig worker. And you start to see these like very non-human words appear. But we're beginning to see that sentiment shift where the human words are emerging higher and higher up as a percentage of the C-suite. We still have a ways to go. Listen, I'm not going to BS anyone in your audience. Like, we still have a mindset shift that needs to take place. And this is why I think as Gen Z comes up, as millennials come up, I don't think we think of it as a dirty word. We're like, good for you. That's awesome. You're an entrepreneur. Like, I think of it as entrepreneurship, which is how most people, when you ask freelancers, what's the first word that comes to mind? They identify as entrepreneurs.
Fractional jobs. That's something that, a fractional, fill in the blank has been on the rise. I wrote a story about this at the end of last year. The growth in the use of the title on LinkedIn has just been astronomical. I haven't done a quick search yet to see how it looks today. What is the difference in your mind between fractional and freelance?
I think there's two different ways to think about this. And when I think of fractional, I often think of C-suite levels, like fractional CMO, fractional, C-suite. And here's what's I think so exciting. On our platform, fractional executive roles are growing. And so as we think about baby boomers are getting forced out of a lot of organizations due to forced retirement, trying to cut costs. Some of them are obviously just retiring on their own. But they're turning to the freelancer market. So the market that I think there was a mindset shift that was needed, they're beginning to find this at that fractional level where I can come in and offer my expertise. I think of it as like a short term, I'm filling in almost like this interim role on behalf of leadership. I think freelance is much more broad. I think it can apply not necessarily to these like fractional CMO type roles, but obviously throughout all levels of the organization. And I think I'm excited again for baby boomers, these fractional career choices, organizations need them. CEO tenure is the lowest it's ever been within organizations. And we all know it takes time to go find through succession planning. And I think this is a great, again, win-win for baby boomers, organizations to diffuse that knowledge.
As we wrap here, I do wonder if you have any advice for leaders of large organizations that are battling all of the factors that we've been talking about, and if it's actually possible for them to change. I mean, look, we still need businesses. Businesses provide a lot of services at scale. They offer the right infrastructure for change at scale. You and I are not sitting here to bash these organizations at all. What is your main message to them to get faster, to be able to recruit the kind of right people, and also to live longer than the 12 or 17 years that you mentioned at the beginning? And do companies want to live to be 67 years plus?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question because at the end of the day, you're absolutely right. Like, we need diversity in our commerce. And so we need small businesses, we need medium-sized businesses, and we need large and conglomerates that are operating. That is like a healthy mix of a society. Where our discussion is raising the red flag that the big size organizations are falling behind right now. That has downstream consequences to small businesses and how they operate, So this is all interconnected. And I think that's a really good point you raise. So if you're a leader of a large organization today, one, you're likely burned out and you're likely exhausted. You just came out of a pandemic and now you're hit with artificial intelligence and now you're hit with a bad economy. You have to recognize that and understand that there's a lot of angst that you may have as a leader and there's a lot of angst underneath the workforce. The reality is leadership has never been harder. The best thing that I think you can do right now is take a big step back and think about what is the value that we are creating? Who are the customers that we're trying to serve, and really get back to the purpose of an organization. I think that has gotten really sideways coming out of the pandemic. We've all gotten to fire drill mode and are just trying to keep up. But we know what's evergreen. If you are a business and you are creating value and you're servicing customers, you are going to stay in business. And the way to do that today is through adopting AI. You have to have technology at the center of how you operate. It is the only way forward right now. It's just like, I can't imagine being a company today without having a website or operating through the internet. That's ridiculous. So get ahead of it. And if not, you're going to fall behind.
One last question I'll ask you too is, what is the value of leadership at the end of the day? Why should anyone step up to the plate when it is that hard?
I think today there's been 20 years we've done a disservice to managers. We have trained through MBA programs and told managers your number one job is to manage the P&L. And you do that by planning and controlling resources. And your primary job is to drive efficiency in the business. We now have this thing called artificial intelligence, which means that human intelligence is the most valuable thing you can be bringing out as a leader today. And so if you're a leader today, I would argue your primary job is not to manage the P&L and drive efficiency. Your primary job is to bring out human intelligence. And that means you need to lean much more into empathy, creativity, innovation, all of the things that we've actually stripped out in favor of efficiency. We've got to put back in. Recently wrote a book called Essential that brings a lot of these thinking into practice, because it's hard. We were not talking about the messy human side. And I think really being real with leaders of like, this is the job today, I think is going to be, really important as we move forward.
Any last thoughts that you want to leave our audience with?
No, I just appreciate you doing this, Hope. I think this is great conversations, and thanks for taking the time for the longer form conversations here.
Absolutely. We're going to help everyone stay grounded and get some real practical, tactical advice to apply to their lives. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thanks.